you to all of you for being here. Do you hear me well? It's okay? Yeah, you're fine. Good. A real pleasure to spend this moment with you, my dear friends. So I want to thank you first for giving me the opportunity to reflect with you on these three notions of peace, equality, and justice. If we translate those notions to Hebrew, of course, we have peace, shalom, shivyon, equality, which is a modern word, actually. Maybe in classical Jewish texts, we might speak of some form of chesed, and justice, tzedek. But before, let me start with a confession. I don't know who each one is coming from now in Europe or around the world, but to my ears, when I hear those three words, immediately come to my mind three other words: a triptych, a kind of a political program or ideal that is very dear to my heart. Because I'm French, it's difficult to reinvent oneself. Whenever I hear a triptych, three values, immediately I think about the most famous trilogy of the French Republic that you all know, those three words engraved on almost every public building in France, on town halls and schools, almost like a religious promise in a very, very secular country. I'm speaking, of course, of those three words: liberté, égalité, fraternité, liberty, equality, and fraternity. I've reflected a lot around those notions over the years for a particular reason, because I had the privilege of living and studying in three countries. I grew up in France, and I studied and lived in the United States and in Israel. And these three places have one thing in common in terms of values and ideas, is that each of them sees itself as holding an existential mission, as being in some way a compass or a beacon for humanity. Each perceives itself, for one reason or another, as Or LaGoyim, as a light unto the nations. The French Republic triptych is directly inherited from the French Revolution and the Enlightenment, but like every ideal, it struggles to become reality. So my international experience in France, Israel, and the US has allowed me to reflect on the ways in which everywhere those ideals remain partially unrealized. Those are beautiful fictions that human societies struggle to transform somehow into reality. Liberté, égalité, fraternité. When I lived in the US, in the United States, a few years ago, I was struck by the extent to which America has chosen liberté, freedom, as the core and sacred value, the land of the free, as the song says, freedom of speech and expression, freedom to wear a gun, to invest, to do business. This is America's pride. And as a good French person, I used to tease my American friends, and I would tell them very often, it's wonderful that you have the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast, but perhaps you could have a statue of equality on the West Coast, just to create some kind of balance. And of course, it was easy for me to tease them, and they were perfectly entitled to tease me back, to mock me in return, because in France, the value that probably carries the most powerful weight in French society, the emphasis in the French Republic's motto, is clearly on equality. Supposedly, France, with its heritage of the welfare state and social solidarity, is attached, at least in principle, to equality among citizens and equality of opportunity. In principle, there is no discrimination between people because of origin, skin color, economic status, and supposedly people are blind to color of skins or to religion. Everyone has access to education and to free healthcare. The tax paid to support the poor, because it's the French recipe of equality. And of course, you will rightly tell me that it's only partly true. There are profound inequalities in France, just as there are profound threats to freedom and liberty in the United States. There is always and everywhere, a founding fiction that very rarely lives up to it. And what about Israel? Well, one cannot say that Israel has chosen liberty as its supreme value. Israeli society places a lot of duty and responsibility upon its citizens. Nor is Israel the champion of equality. Rather, one could argue that supposedly it places much emphasis on fraternity, achva in Hebrew, the idea of a brotherhood of citizens who fight side by side. I'm thinking now about achim laneshek, brothers in arms, engaged in an existential struggle. But again, the fraternity model is only very partially realized. Some do not serve, others do not benefit from this solidarity, etc., etc. So liberté, égalité, fraternité. Every society chooses to invest more heavily in one value than the other and struggles to embody three of them. And that's not unique to societies. I would say that Jewish thought wrestles with the same dilemma. If you look in the Bible, you see in the Torah that freedom, liberty, does not really exist, not in the modern sense of the word, of course, doing whatever one wishes. When the Hebrews are liberated from Egypt to be bnei chorim, to be free people, they are no longer servants or slaves of Pharaoh, Eved Paro, but they become Eved Hashem, they become servants of God. They are not free to reject divine authority. They accept to be mitzuvim, to be commanded. And the same is true for equality. It's obviously not a biblical concept. The Bible assigns different tasks to different people. The Kohen is not the Levite. The Levite has to assume another role than the Israelites. Men and women do not have an identical obligation. Jews and non-Jews do not either. You get the idea. And now that leaves fraternity. And there I must say it's hardly the greatest talent of our biblical ancestors. In fact, if you look at the entire book of Genesis, you could simply sum up the entire story with a single sentence. I have a brother and I cannot stand him. So either I kill him, or I throw him into a pit, or I sell him into slavery, or I steal his place, or I steal his blessing. It's a rather strange definition of fraternity. So no, the French Republic triptych does not quite work for Jewish thought. So perhaps we should come up with another one. And fortunately, I believe there is another one in the Bible, not a slogan or a motto in 3 words, but I would rather say in 4 words. 4 words or notions or values that have everything to do with the topic that brings us together today. Those 4 words appear famously in a psalm, Psalm 85, that some of you might remember. And I think there is not a better moment in the year to quote this psalm because yesterday we read Parashat Korach in the Tanakh, and look or think about who this psalm is attributed to. The psalm begins with these words, Lamenatzeach livnei Korach. To the leader, a psalm of the sons of Korach, the descendants of Korach, the descendants of the greatest demagogue in the Bible, Moses' cousin, the one precisely who uses liberty, equality, and fraternity as an argument against his cousin's authority. Anyway, we thought that Korach disappeared without leaving a trace, yet his descendants return to teach us something, not just anything, but an ethical lesson. And here we are in that psalm, listening to 2 verses 11 and 12 of the psalm, which read this way. I'm sure many of you know those verses. I'll say it in Hebrew and then in English. It says, Chesed ve'emet nifgashu, tzedek ve'shalom nashaku. Mercy, chesed, and truth met together. Righteousness, tzedek ve'shalom, and peace kissed each other. And then comes the following verse, perhaps one of the most beautiful, I think, in the Bible, a famous one. It's actually written on the walls of my synagogue. And the verse says, Emet me'eretz titzmach, ve'tzedek mishamayim nishkaf. Which is usually translated this way: truth, emet, shall spring out of the earth, and righteousness, tzedek, shall look down from heaven. These two verses that I just quoted now, about four notions, seem to dialogue with one another and even kiss one another. Chesed, loving kindness; emet, truth; shalom, peace; and tzedek, justice. We could spend months studying those two verses, the way these notions are sacred and even described sometimes as being God's names in our literature. But because I have only, I think, a few minutes, I would like to focus on a particular verse, the second one. Emet me'eretz titzmach. Truth shall spring out of the earth. V'tzedek mishamayim nishkaf. And righteousness shall look down from heaven. This is the traditional English translation. And it seems to suggest that truth comes from below and justice comes from above. But it's not quite accurate. Listen again to the grammar of the verse. The Hebrew says, Emet me'eretz titzmach. Truth will spring forth from the earth. It's in the future tense. V'tzedek mishamayim nishkaf, and justice looked down from heaven. It's a past tense in Hebrew. So it suggests that justice should be here and now, and truth is in the future. Why does it matter? To answer the question, let me turn to an extraordinary midrash found in Bereshit Rabbah. The commentary in Bereshit Rabbah says the following. It says that when God wished to create humanity, God consulted those four values: chesed, loving kindness; emet, truth; shalom, peace; and tzedek, justice. And according to that midrash, they began, those four notions, they began to argue with each other, and they entered in a kind of fight. Loving kindness argued with truth, and loving kindness, chesed, said to God, please God, create human beings, because they will perform chesed, they will perform acts of kindness. But then truth replied, no, nonsense. Do not create humanity, because humanity will lie constantly. Then there is a second argument that comes in. Peace argues with justice, and justice says to God, please, God, create humanity, because people will perform tzedek. Humanity will perform acts of righteousness. And peace replied, no, nonsense. Do not create humanity, because people will endlessly wage wars. Do not create them. And then comes the astonishing part. According to that midrash, God decided to listen to justice and loving kindness, meaning it chose to create humanity. And at this very moment, according to the midrash, God took truth, emet, and threw it to the ground. And this is now how the verse is understood by our sages. Emet me'eretz titzmach. Truth will spring from the earth at some point. Truth will rise. but truth is still lying on the ground. One day in the future, it will rise and we will recognize it finally. Justice must come first. Justice must come first, and then truth will appear and will be acknowledged. How should we understand this extraordinary rabbinic story? I think that Midrash teaches us something fundamental about the order of things. God chose to believe in humanity. He chose to trust that human beings will be capable of justice and kindness. And for a moment, he agreed to compromise on truth, not because truth is less sacred, but because truth, like peace, do not come at the beginning of the story. They are seen in the end. So, friends, beware of people who tell you, I know the truth and I see the truth and I own the truth. Truth and peace are not seen at the beginning. They are what emerge when human beings act first with justice and with kindness. In other words, act justly, act kindly, so that through your actions, truth will emerge and peace will be possible. Truth and peace are never given at the outset. They're always a hope, always a dream, just like the French dream of liberté, égalité, fraternité. We are not there yet. Lo alecha, amalacha ligmor. It's not our duty to complete the work. Velo ata ben chorin leibatel mimena, but we are not free to desist from it. Thank you.